Today, we are going to be painting up some Blood Bowl Orcs for the recent released Blood Bowl game. Or maybe it was 20 years ago, I can't remember which. But anyway, I'm getting them out of the closet finally, and so let's jump in. Of course, I'm painting Blood Bowl Orcs here, but it could be easily applied to Fantasy Orcs or 40k Orcs with a K, or any Orc in general. So don't go out and buy your Blood Bowl Orcs just to follow along. But anyway, let's begin. We are starting off with one of the regular linemen, and we're beginning with a coat of Vallejo Model Color Deep Green, and we're going on pretty thick with this coat. And I'm going to be painting these guys up a little bit more cartoonish with a bit more contrast than what I normally use. So trying to be careful with this first coat, unlike normal, and only applying it to the flesh areas and not trying to get it on anything else. I'm purposely trying to leave a dark black line in between the flesh and the other areas of the miniature. That first coat of deep green was just a shade layer, and actually wanted something a bit brighter for my skin tone. So we mixed in I was about to say a little bit, but actually a great deal of Vallejo Model Air Green Zinc Chromate. The paint's very thin, and so I added it's about a 50-50 mix of the deep green and that green zinc chromate to lighten it up. It didn't quite get the exact color I wanted, so I also added some Vallejo Model Color Flat Yellow. And this is going over everything, just keeping the previous deep green in the recesses under the arms, any areas that I want shade. With the base coat out of the way, we can start working on the highlights, and that's very easily done by taking the previous mixture and simply adding more Vallejo Model Color Flat Yellow to it. Paint is rather thin here because I am putting a bit more effort into these figures than I would with, say, my Dark Elves, because I don't have 100 of these to paint. I only have about a dozen, so I'm taking a bit more time with them. Now, we could continue the highlighting process simply by adding more and more yellow at each step, but that tends to get a little bit boring and dull, so we're going to add another color to this mixture that we used on the previous step, this time adding Vallejo Game Color Elf Flesh, and that helps to give it a slightly more human tint to it, very slight, but it makes it much more interesting than just using the straight yellow. And I used it very subtly on this project, but you can actually work in a lot more standard human skin tone colors to your orcs, and get a much more interesting tone, a gradation tone between the colors. For the final highlight step, or the edging step, I added quite a bit more elf flesh to the previous mixture, and I'm just going to hit the very tippy tops of all the highlight points. You notice here I'm doing mainly dots. I'm not wiping the brush, I'm not brushing the paint on, I'm just hitting with the tip of the brush points that I want to highlight, kneecaps, the knuckles, areas like that, cheekbones, and what have you. You may also notice there's a bit of texture on his lip. The last three highlight steps, I put a little bit texture just to give it a bit more interesting surface area to look at rather than just a flat lip area. Just running some lines up and down to make it more interesting. I probably could have done the same on the chin as well, but I didn't think about it until later. Would have made him look a bit like a squirrel, probably. Onto his big fat lips, and those we're painting with Vallejo Game Color Warlock Purple, which may sound like an unusual choice, but once again, some unusual colors you can use on your orcs to really help them pop out. Purple is a really good shade color for orcs. Again, it adds variation to the skin tone rather than just being everything solid green. I did not work purple into the scheme, but I initially had that planned, and I will work it in a bit more to the Black Orcs when we get to them. But for now, just painting lips and also adding a little bit of color underneath the bags of their eyes. And then the lips are finished off by highlighting them twice, by adding elf flesh, a little bit of elf flesh each time. And notice once again, we're adding texture to the lips by using very short brush strokes to make the lips more interesting than just a flat surface. So very short brush strokes, just up and down, one layer all across the lips, and then we go back on a second layer with a little bit more elf flesh highlighted, working on just the center of the upper lip area. Since we are on the subject of orc skin tones, we're going to go ahead and jump over to the black orc blockers now. And started off with I started off with a coat of Warlock Purple. I did mention that purple makes a good shade on orcs. However, as the process went through, I actually kind of ended up changing it and adding it to the end. However, I used it on my test orc, so I had to use it on this one as well, but you can skip the purple at this step and go straight on to the green, which is Vallejo Model Color Black Green. Since these are black orcs, I didn't want to go with the same bright cartoony green skin tone I used on the other orcs. I wanted something darker. So we're going to skip adding greens, we're going to skip adding yellows, and we're going to go straight to the flesh colors. In this case, to the black green, I'm adding Vallejo Panzer Ace's Flesh Base. For the next layer, once again adding a little bit more of the Panzer Ace's Flesh Base and just working our way up towards the highlights. Here you can see a good example of the texture I was talking about on the upper lip. It does make it a bit more interesting to add that small little detail to the figure. Now, I could continue highlighting with that same flesh base color, but like on the previous orcs, that could get boring. So we're going to mix it up a bit, and I added some of the elf flesh that I used on the orcs to the flesh at this point on the black orcs. And again, mixing the colors changes things up, can make things more interesting, more fun to paint, more unique. The point is, you don't have to be stuck into just a three-tier triad color of highlights, dark blue, medium blue, light blue. When it comes to especially organic things like flesh, you can mix up the highlights and change things as you go along to keep them interesting. And then the final edging step, more elf flesh added, and once again just hitting the tips of all the areas that I want to really pop out. Top of the nose, the cheeks, a little bit more on the flesh, the upper lip area, and the knuckles. Once again, going way higher on the contrast than I would normally do, but I did want a cartoony look for these guys, and some people like that style better. So I think it's cartoony, but other people think it's totally fine. Opinions differ. Well, choose whatever you like. And then finally, we're back to where we started from with the Vallejo Game Color Warlock Purple. Slightly thinned, just putting it into the recesses to carry that purple color through that I initially wanted on the figure, and also helps to carry the color of the lip throughout the miniature a little bit more. So a little bit in the ears, around the bags of the eyes, and any of the recesses where I think it needs a bit more shade. But with that, we are done with the orcs, and we're done with the black orcs, at least the flesh. And so in part 2, we're going to start working on the armor and everything else. See you then.